Imagine waking up one morning and 50,000 soldiers are simply gone. No bodies, no survivors, no final radio transmission, no goodbye letters left on their cots. Just silence, the kind of silence that swallows entire armies whole and leaves historians scratching their heads for generations. This is not a ghost story. This is not science fiction. This is one of the most haunting, baffling, and deeply researched mysteries of the Second World War, a war already full of unimaginable horrors. But this is different, because when armies vanish, the questions that remain are sometimes more terrifying than the answers. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you won't just know what happened, you'll understand why it was buried, why the world wasn't supposed to find out, and why some secrets from World War II are still being uncovered today. Let's go back, all the way back to 1942. Part 1. The World on Fire. By the time 1942 arrived, the world had already been bleeding for 3 years. Hitler's Germany had consumed most of Western Europe. Japan had launched its devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, dragging the United States into a conflict it had desperately tried to avoid. The Soviet Union, after being blindsided by Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, was locked in the most brutal theater of war in human history, the Eastern Front, where millions of men were dying not just in battle, but from cold, starvation, disease, and sheer exhaustion. The scale of the Eastern Front is almost impossible to comprehend even today. Historians estimate that more than 30 million people died in that single theater of war. Entire cities were leveled. Villages were erased from maps. Forests were turned to ash. Rivers ran red. And in the middle of all this chaos, with armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, colliding across thousands of miles of frozen terrain, it was almost too easy for things to disappear. People, units, entire divisions. The chaos of war created the perfect conditions for mysteries. And the mystery we're exploring today is one of the deepest, most thoroughly documented, and yet still partially unsolved cases in the history of the conflict. Part 2. The Eastern Front and the Missing. To understand how 50,000 soldiers could vanish, you first have to understand the Eastern Front's record-keeping, or rather, its near-total lack of it. Unlike the Western Front, where the Allied forces had sophisticated logistics chains, photographic documentation units, war correspondence, and meticulous record-keeping infrastructure, the Eastern Front was operating in conditions that defied organization. The Soviet Army, in particular, was hemorrhaging so badly in the early years of the war that accurate casualty records became almost an afterthought. Commanders were more focused on keeping their men alive and keeping themselves alive than documenting exactly who had fallen where. When a unit was wiped out, there was often no one left to file the report. When a division retreated in disarray, their records frequently didn't follow them. And on the German side, the Wehrmacht was simultaneously keeping meticulous records, a deeply bureaucratic institution, while also suffering losses so staggering that even their systems began to break down under the pressure. This environment, this storm of bureaucratic chaos, overlaid on industrial-scale slaughter, is where our mystery begins. In the summer of 1942, a German offensive known as Fall Blau Case Blue was launched with the goal of capturing the oil fields of the Caucasus and the strategic city of Stalingrad. It was an enormously ambitious operation, involving Army Group South, split into Army Group A and Army Group B, pushing deep into Soviet territory along a front stretching hundreds of miles. Among the units committed to this offensive were tens of thousands of men, German regulars, Romanian allies, Hungarian forces, Italian contingents, all pushing southeast, all moving fast, all caught in a logistical web that was rapidly becoming impossible to manage. It is within this offensive that the disappearances begin. Part 3. The Units That Never Came Home. In the historical record, there are several specific instances during the World War II Eastern Front campaign where large formations, units numbering in the thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, effectively ceased to exist without clear, documented explanations of their fate. The most famous case is Stalingrad itself, where the German Sixth Army, over 300,000 men at its peak, was encircled and eventually destroyed. But Stalingrad, for all its horror, was documented. The surrender was filmed. The survivors, roughly 91,000 men, marched into Soviet captivity. Their fates, though grim, were eventually traced. What we're talking about today are the other cases. The formations that vanished in the spaces between the documented battles. The units whose records conflict, whose survivors never surfaced, whose fate remained officially unresolved for decades. One of the most striking examples involves Romanian forces operating on the flanks of the German advance. In November 1942, when the Soviet counteroffensive known as Operation Uranus was launched, it specifically targeted the weaker Romanian and Italian forces holding the flanks of the German position at Stalingrad. The Romanian 3rd and 4th Armies were hit with devastating force. The documented losses were catastrophic. But the documented part is key, because researchers, including Romanian historians who gained access to previously classified Soviet records after the fall of communism in 1989, discovered that the numbers didn't add up. Entire battalions were listed as destroyed on the German side. The Soviets listed them as scattered or fled. Yet prisoner records showed far fewer men than the math demanded. Men who were listed as dead had no graves. Men who were listed as captured appeared in no Soviet prisoner records. And men who were listed as having fled, where did they flee to? The steppes of southern Russia in November 1942 were frozen, featureless, and hundreds of miles from any friendly lines. Where did they go? Part 5. The Search for Truth. Decades after the war ended, the search for the missing continues. In Russia, Ukraine, and the former Soviet republics, volunteer organizations, sometimes called search battalions, or poiskoviki in Russian, spend their summers combing battlefields, forests, and riverbanks for the remains of fallen soldiers. Every year, they find thousands of sets of remains. Every year, they identify a fraction of them. The work is painstaking, often heartbreaking, and never finished. In Germany, the German War Graves Commission, the Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräberversorgung, has been working since the war ended to locate and properly inter the remains of German soldiers. As of recent years, they have identified and registered well over 800,000 German war dead in the former Soviet Union alone. They believe hundreds of thousands more remain unaccounted for. Romanian historians, following the opening of the archives in the 1990s, launched systematic efforts to reconcile German, Soviet, and Romanian records of the battles of 1942 to 1943. Their work revealed thousands of men whose fates remained officially categorized as unknown, not killed, not captured, just unknown. The technology of modern forensics has helped. DNA identification of remains has allowed families to finally receive confirmation of deaths that had been uncertain for 70, 80 years. In a few remarkable cases, the identified remains have overturned the official record. Men listed as having died in one place were found buried hundreds of miles away, suggesting either that official records were wrong or that something had happened to them after the officially recorded moment of their death. These discoveries don't close the mystery, they deepen it. Part 6. What the mystery tells us. There is a temptation, when exploring a mystery like this, to want a clean answer, a single explanation that ties everything together, closes every open file, and lets us move on. The true story of the vanished soldiers of World War II doesn't offer that. What it offers instead is a window into something more profound and more disturbing. The fundamental inability of human systems, military bureaucracies, governments, national narratives to honestly account for catastrophe. Wars produce millions of deaths, but they also produce millions of erasures. Men who were fathers, sons, brothers, husbands, men who had names and faces and histories are reduced in the bureaucratic record to a notation, a category, a number. And when even that fails, they become nothing at all. They vanish. The 50,000 soldiers who form the core of this mystery are not unique. They are representative. They are the face of a much larger disappearance, the disappearance of truth itself in the fog of the most destructive conflict in human history. And the fact that we are still searching, still finding remains in Ukrainian fields and Russian forests 8 decades later tells us something important about what we owe the dead, not just the documented dead, not just the ones the records chose to count, all of them. Part 7. The Echoes. There are families alive today, in Romania, in Germany, in Italy, in Hungary, who never received an answer. Grandchildren who grew up knowing only that their grandfather went to the war and didn't come back. No grave to visit, no confirmed date of death, no final confirmation. For these families, the mystery is not historical. It is personal. It is ongoing. One Romanian woman, interviewed by a journalist in 2018, described growing up with a photograph of her grandfather on the wall, a young soldier in his Romanian army uniform, taken before he shipped out to the Eastern Front in 1942. He was 23 years old in the photograph. He never came home. No one ever told her family exactly what happened to him. She was 76 years old at the time of the interview. She said she had written letters to the Romanian Defense Ministry, to German war graves archives, to Soviet-era record bureaus. She had received polite responses acknowledging her inquiry. She had never received an answer. "I just want to know where he is," she said. "He deserves to be somewhere. He deserves to not just be nowhere." Her words capture something essential about why these mysteries matter, not as historical puzzles for academics to solve, but as human stories. As lives that were lived, that mattered, that were then swallowed by something so enormous that even the machinery of nations couldn't keep track. Conclusion: the silence speaks. The day 50,000 soldiers vanished is not a single day. It is a collection of days, chaotic, violent, freezing, desperate days, scattered across months and years of a war that consumed everything it touched. The soldiers didn't vanish in a flash. They disappeared, one by one, unit by unit, in encirclements and retreats and blizzards and bureaucratic erasures, until the sum of all those individual disappearances became a number large enough to stagger the imagination. 50,000 gone. And the mystery endures not because we lack intelligence or resources to solve it, but because the war itself was an event so vast, so destructive, and so deliberately obscured by the governments that prosecuted it, that complete truth may simply be beyond recovery. What we can do, what historians, researchers, and families continue to do, is keep searching, keep asking, keep refusing to accept that the missing deserve nothing more than silence. Because in that refusal, there is something important. Something that honors not just the dead, but the obligation of the living to remember honestly to refuse the comfortable falsification of history that lets us pretend that wars are cleaner, simpler, and more accountable than they actually are. The soldiers vanished. But the question of what happened to them, and why we still don't fully know that question, is very much alive. And it demands an answer.